Hello, welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do part 3 of my bookshelf tour. So part 1 was this bookshelf, part 2 was this bookshelf, part 3 is obviously going to be this bookshelf. I've already cleared off the books from the top shelf, and part 4, when I get around to it, will be the bookshelf that my phone is propped up on right now. And then I realized, by the way, I have not covered anything up on the top on this side or on the one where my phone is propped up. I'll probably do a separate video on that because there are a lot of books piled up on top of the bookcase that I am looking at right now. So that will be its own separate video. And we'll get to that further down the line. But let's jump in with this. We're picking up with Rachel Kushner's The Flamethrowers. I have not read this. I used to own a copy of Telex from Cuba. Apparently I don't anymore. The weird thing about moving a lot, and I have moved a lot over the last 20 years, even if for the last 5 or 6 I've been in the same place, things disappear. And it's bizarre. But I used to have a copy of Telex from Cuba, now I only have The Flamethrowers. Weird. Then we have Angels in America by Tony Kushner. I'm really shocked, appalled, horrified that I have not gotten around to reading this yet. I really need, every year I say I'm going to finally read this, and I haven't. I've heard that there's an audiobook where they have the cast of the most recent revival from Broadway. And I've also looked for that, but it's not available on any of the services that I use. So I just really need to get around to finally doing it. That would be great. Next, we're getting into some Jhumpa Lahiri books. First is Interpreter of Maladies. This is the one that she won the Pulitzer Prize for. I really love this story collection. I haven't read it in a while, but I've read the first story, which is called The Temporary Matter, a lot. I think pretty much every other story in it I've only read the one time, but A Temporary Matter is one that I have read a lot, and I've really enjoyed this book. Then we have The Lowland, which is a book that I read. I managed to get an advance copy of it, and I don't remember at all, which is kind of bizarre how that happens. Don't know why. I remember liking it, but don't remember anything about it. Couldn't tell you what it's about. Then there's The Namesake, which I read and really enjoyed. Have not seen the movie, but yeah, just really enjoyed this book. And of course, there is Unaccustomed Earth, which is kind of a story collection. It ends with 2 interlinked novellas, if I remember correctly, but it is kind of a story collection as well. And I have read that, and I like this. So I've read all of my Jhumpa Lahiri books, I just don't remember one of them. Then we have a book called Conditional Citizens by Leila Lalami. This is a book that was released earlier this year. I have an advance copy that was sent to me by Steve Donahue. I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but this seems like a super timely book for the time we live in. Although there is a lot going on in the time we live in. So I really want to try to get to this before the end of the year. Looking forward to it. And then we have Dead Wake by Erik Larson. I have read 2 books by Erik Larson. I had an ebook of The Devil in the White City. Again, remember when I used to read ebooks? And I listened to an audio version of In the Garden of Beasts. I have not read Dead Wake yet, which is about the Lusitania. And I have not read The Splendid and the Vile yet either, which was just released this year, and which is about Winston Churchill. I have kind of mixed feelings about Erik Larson, but overall I enjoy them. Next is a book by D.H. Lawrence called Women in Love, which I have had for a really, really long time. I bought this at the first Borders I worked at somewhere around the year 2001, 2002. So I've had it for about 20 years and have never gotten around to reading it. And I would like to do it at some point. And then there's Heavy by Kiyoshi Lehman. I haven't gotten around to reading this one yet, but I've heard so many good things and it sounds really interesting, so I have to get around to it. Then we have 2 books by David Leavitt. The first is The Indian Clerk, and the other one is The Two Hotel Frankfurts, both of which, actually one of which I got when I was working at Macmillan because it is published by Bloomsbury, which is a client of Macmillan's. I worked with them. And I worked in the client division of Macmillan for one of my 10 years at Macmillan. I worked on a couple of them. Have not gotten around to reading The Indian Clerk, but I've heard really good things, and I frankly should just really get around to it. I managed to get an advance copy of The Two Hotel Frankfurts and have not gotten around to this one either. So at some point, I really need to read both David Leavitt's. Then we have To Kill a Mockingbird. I have other editions of this book, but we'll get to those in a different book haul. Again, the last one, the one where all of the ones are piled up here. This is the one that I have. It's mass market, because that way I can read it and reread it and not worry about it falling apart. And I have read this book many times. I am actually a big fan of it. Then we have The Memoirs of a Beautiful Boy by Robert Lelou. This is another book that has been on my TBR. Even when June comes around and I want to focus on Pride reading, it comes up a lot for that, but I have not gotten around to reading it. I would like to do that. It is a memoir about like a quirky, troubled family, and I love quirky, troubled families. I have a quirky, troubled family, so I need to get around to this at some point. It seems like a perfectly me book. Then we have Mailman by J. Robert Lennon. I have never heard of anybody else who knows this author, knows this book, has read this book, but it was recommended to me by someone I worked with at Borders. She said it was absolutely fantastic. It sounded really quirky, and I was super into quirky books at the time. I still do like quirky books. I've always kept it and intend to get around to it at some point. We'll see how that works out. It has not worked so far. Then we have 2 books by Jonathan Lethem. The first is Chronic City, which I have not gotten around to reading at all. I used to own copies of Motherless Brooklyn, and which I have read, and Fortress of Solitude, which I did not get around to reading, but I purchased a copy of Chronic City and have not gotten around to it. I do have an advanced copy of Dissident Gardens, another book by him, and I started this one and really wasn't liking it, so I put it down. I can see I got to page 97 and stopped there, thinking I might pick it up again at some point. I feel like he's an author I try to like more than I actually like. I'd love to hear what you think. Then we have Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. I used to also have a copy of The Stepford Wives. Don't know what happened to it. I believe I have some of his other books on ebook. Again, remember when I used to read ebooks? It's the weirdest thing. I'm actually a big fan of Rosemary's Baby and The Stepford Wives. I think they are fantastic pieces of horror fiction if you have not read them. Then we have 3 books by David Levithan. The first is Every Day, which I have not gotten around to reading yet. The Lover's Dictionary, which is actually really fantastic, and I got this one for free when I was working at Macmillan because it comes from FSG, which is a division of Macmillan, so I was able to grab a copy of it, and I really, really liked it a lot. And then there is Two Boys Kissing, which I got an advanced copy of, and which I remember really liking as well. I thought it was fantastic. Then we have The Rules Do Not Apply by Ariel Levy. This is an advanced reader's edition, which I never got around to reading and should probably do it at some point because it sounds like a book I would be really interested in. And then we have a very me book, Seduction, Sex, Lies, and Stardom in Howard Hughes' Hollywood by Karina Longworth. Karina Longworth hosts the podcast You Must Remember This, which is about stories from Hollywood's first century, and there's a current season going on right now about Peter Bogdanovich and his wife and how she influenced his career. Previous seasons were about Howard Hughes and the women that he was involved with. There was a previous season about Charles Manson and his Hollywood connections, and I find the podcast fascinating. If you follow along at all, you know that I really like old Hollywood and old movies and the Oscars and things like that, so this perfectly ties in a lot of things that I like. And then we have the best of H.P. Lovecraft, blood-curdling tales of the horror and the macabre. Have not gotten around to reading this, but I felt like because within the horror genre he is an author that people talk about a lot, I felt like I should get around to it at some point. Some of his work is referenced a lot in mainstream pop culture in America, so I felt like I should, but I haven't gotten around to it. The cover is interesting. It looks like somebody's college computer art project, but hey. So looking at the TBR titles for this shelf, again, if you don't remember, how I handle my TBR is if I want to actively prioritize a book, I pull it a little bit further out than the other ones. So the ones that are actively on my TBR on this shelf are Angels in America, Conditional Citizens, Heavy, Memoirs of a Beautiful Boy, and Seduction by Karina Longworth. Let's get to the next shelf. Next we have H is for Hawk by Helen MacDonald. I have not gotten around to reading it. This was actually a gift from my father. It is an autographed copy. He was at Northshire Bookstore in Vermont shortly after I moved here to Montana, I believe, and he wanted to get me a gift from Northshire, so he asked just a random bookseller what their favorite book of the year was, and they said this. And they sent it, and I've heard really good things, and I would like to get around to it at some point, but as you can see, there are a lot of things I would like to get around to, so someday. And then we have A Burning by Megha Majumdar. This is a new book, was just released recently, and I would really like to read it. It sounds very fascinating. I have not read it yet. Then we have The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. This was my favorite book that I read in the year 2018. I just really like it. I like it a lot. Then we have Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, which I thought was good but not great. Kind of erring on the side of okay. And I already got rid of The Glass Hotel, which was her other book that recently came out this year, which I read. And then we have Death in Venice and Other Stories by Thomas Mann. I got this because, I mean, it's been on my radar for a while, but somebody said that when I was reading A Ladder to the Sky, somebody said that I should read this, A Death in Venice specifically, to try to get a sense of what was being done in that book. Well, I hated A Ladder to the Sky, so that kind of backburnered this, but I shouldn't judge it based on that. Now we get to the Hilary Mantel of it all. Now, I used to own a copy of Wolf Hall, but like I said, when you move a fair amount, things have a way of disappearing. I have no idea where my copy of Wolf Hall went. But I did read it, and although I thought it was slow and very difficult to read, you need to be an active reader in that book. And I relied very heavily on the cast of characters in the beginning and the family trees. I ended up enjoying it. I was very frustrated when I first finished it, but I loved it when it was done. And I loved Bring Up the Bodies even more. It's probably my favorite so far. I have not gotten around to The Mirror and the Light, which is the concluding chapter in the trilogy, and I need to at some point. The difference between the UK cover and the American covers of these books is it's kind of staggering. Now we have Ohio by Stephen Markley. I found a used copy of this in my local used bookstore. Have not gotten around to it, but I've heard so many really good things about this book, so at some point I really need to do it. And then we have Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I am planning a buddy read of this for later in the year. The only book of his that I have read is 100 Years of Solitude, which I used to own a copy of, but don't know where it is. And then we have The Tsar of Love and Techno by Anthony Marra. I did read this. I know it's a collection of short stories, and I vaguely remember some of them, but for the most part, it has kind of faded from my memory, but I do remember liking it. Life of Pi, which I read when it was released, and well, not when it was released. I read it after it won the Booker Prize. And actually, what convinced me to read it was that there was a quote. I don't know if it's on the book or if it was in a review, but it said that this book will make you believe in God, and I was like, well, let me try that out. Yeah. But this is a novel of such rare and wondrous storytelling that it may, as one character claims, make you believe in God. Well, it didn't, but I liked the book, so there's that. By the way, the inside is beautiful. So, there you go. And then we have The Razor's Edge by W. Somerset Maugham. Have not gotten around to reading this, but I would love to at some point. I've heard really good things, and I've never read any of his books. Now we get to 3 books by Armistead Maupin. The first is Tales of the City, which I have not gotten around to reading, although I have seen the TV movie miniseries of it back in the day, and again recently. And I'm kind of astonished I have never, in all that time, gotten around to reading this. I also have more Tales of the City, which I had purchased because I figured I was going to read this in no time at all, and then I'd move on to this and probably do the whole series. And I never got around to either one of them. Oddly, you know what I have read? The Days of Anna Madrigal, which is one of the more recent ones, when Armistead Maupin recently went back and wrote a couple of books in the series, and this one was not great. But it also feels like it depends on familiarity with these, which I kind of had from the miniseries, all 3 of them, but not from the books themselves. So I'm not going to let my meh feelings about this one keep me from getting around to these. And then we have Kevin Maxwell's Forced Out. I talked about this in a recent book haul. Bernardine Evaristo recommended this book given a lot of the current political goings on both here and in the UK. It is about a gay black police officer in the UK who tries to get along and make his career as a police officer work, and eventually gets forced out. And I would love to read this. Then we have a book that I picked up because of BookTube, and I don't quite remember who talked about it. It's The Parentations by Kate Mayfield. Around the time I first joined BookTube, I joined in December, and people were doing their annual wrap-ups and their favorites, and somebody named this one of their favorite books of the year. I want to say it was Simon Savage, but I could be wrong, and I didn't look it up. But anyway, I bought it because they described it as a really quirky book. It sounded kind of interesting, and that quirky books kind of just appealed to me, so I bought it. Have not gotten around to reading it yet. And then we have Behold the Dreamers by Mbalo Mbue. This is an advanced reader's copy, and it was blessed by Oprah after it was released. I haven't gotten around to reading it, but I've heard very good things. Amateur by Thomas Page McBee. This is something that I have been really wanting to read for about a year and have not gotten around to because it toys with the idea of gender and gender roles and gender expectations, and I find that fascinating. Now we have 3 books by James McBride. The first is Deacon King Kong, which is the one that was released this year. Steve Donahue was kind enough to send me a copy of the advanced reader's copy of it. I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I really want to. This is another one that was recently blessed by Oprah. And I also have 5 Carat Soul, which is a collection of short stories James McBride released. Have not gotten around to it, want to at some point. The reason I have all of these James McBride books is The Good Lord Bird, which I read and absolutely loved. It is a fantastic, fantastic, fantastic book. I love it. Then we have Tomorrow Will Be Different, Love, Loss, and the Fight for Trans Equality by Sarah McBride with a foreword by Joe Biden. I read this. I enjoyed it. Recommend it. Then we have Breakfast on Pluto by Patrick McCabe. This was a finalist for the Booker Prize when it was released. Been on my TBR for a while because it has a transgender character at the center, but it was published, I want to say, in the 90s, and I'm very curious about how that is handled back then. Yes, originally published in Great Britain in 1998. So it will be interesting to see if this holds up or if it's problematic or what. Then we have Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I have not gotten around to reading this, and I'm kind of shocked about that. And then there's No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy, which I have gotten around to reading, and which I actually found, and I know this is a kind of a big debate between people who have read Cormac McCarthy, I found this one to be more bleak than The Road. But there are people who disagree with that, but I have read it. We have one more Cormac McCarthy book to go, but that's on the next shelf. So my TBR books from this one are A Burning by Megha Majumdar, The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, Love in the Time of Cholera, Tales of the City, Forced Out, Amateur, Deacon King Kong, and Breakfast on Pluto. Let's get to the next shelf. And here is that other Cormac McCarthy book. It is, of course, The Road, which I read and loved and have not read or reread since it was first published. Part of me feels like I should revisit it, but I really loved it at the time it was published. Then we have Alice McDermott's Charming Billy, which won the National Book Award, yes, and have not gotten around to reading it. Short stories by Thomas McGuane called Cloudbursts. I got this because I saw a great review of it on Instagram and then happened to see it in a local bookstore. So I just snapped it up and we'll hopefully get around to it at some point. Then there's The North Water by Ian McGuire, which was one of the New York Times top 10 books of the year when it was released, and has a blurb from Hilary Mantel. It was longlisted for the Booker Prize. I read it. I really enjoyed it. I liked this book a lot. I hear that they are making, I don't know if it's like a BBC movie or a regular movie of it, but I need to pay attention to that because I think that would be fascinating. Then we have Bright Lights Big City by Jay McInerney. I read this, remember liking it. Lonesome Dove, which I read this year. This was the book that ended up launching my Pulitzer Prize project, and I liked it a lot. It is one of my favorite reads of this year so far. Then I have a copy of Moby Dick by Herman Melville, just in case the spirit of the ruckus gets into me at some point or someday, and I feel like torturing myself with a really long book about sailing. I'm kind of kidding, but also kind of not. I have not read it, in case you can't tell. Then I have a biography of Freddie Mercury that I never got around to reading. The Woman Upstairs by Claire Messud, which I read and actually enjoyed, which was surprising because I absolutely hated The Emperor's Children, which I read and used to own a copy of, but I'm pretty sure that one I deliberately dumped. I know why I don't have that anymore. Next we have Fugitive Pieces by Anne Michaels. This is something that was very deeply recommended to me by someone a long time ago, back in about 2002, because this still has the sticker from the Borders I worked at the time. And I never got around to reading it, but I think it's a Women's Prize winner. I've heard really good things about it and need to get around to it at some point. Then we have Patience and Sarah by Isabel Miller. This is one of the Little Sisters classics, forgotten LGBTQ books that they are republishing so they can be rediscovered, and I would love to get around to that. Circe by Madeline Miller, which I was very excited to read, and then I listened to the audio of the Song of Achilles and really did not like it, so I've very much backburnered this for now. Martin Dressler, The Tale of an American Dreamer by Stephen Millhauser. I have not read this. I did read another book of his, which I used to own, don't know where it is now, Dangerous Laughter, a collection of short stories. This is part of my Pulitzer Prize project, so I will definitely be getting around to it at some point. But after I read Dangerous Laughter, I wanted to go back and read this book, which had won the Pulitzer Prize for him, and just haven't gotten around to it yet. Then we have A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza, which, if you follow along, you already know was my favorite read from last year. And I just love it. And I even did a tag video about 10 years, 10 books, and I decided that this was my favorite read of the last 10 years. I will link that video down below if you care to watch, but yeah, love this. Then we have two books by Yukio Mishima, neither of which I have read. The first is Confessions of a Mask, which was given to me as a gift about 10 years ago, and I just have not gotten around to reading it, even though it's been on my annual TBR pretty much every year since then. And then I was really interested in these vintage Japan editions of books. So I picked up his The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. Have not gotten around to it yet, but isn't that pretty. Then we have A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mystery, which was my second favorite read from last year. Absolutely love it. Definitely recommend this if you haven't gotten to it. Alright, we're halfway there, and we have another Rohinton Mystery book, Such a Long Journey, which had been planned as a buddy read with Sean and Natalie, and I ended up having hernia surgery and had to back out, and I'll get to it at some point. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, which I had been thinking I would get rid of since I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but people voted to keep it in a poll on my community tab, so here it is, and maybe I'll get around to it someday. I hear very mixed things about David Mitchell, but it's mostly about his new stuff, so maybe this one should be fine. Then we have Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell, which is part of my Pulitzer Prize project, and something I'm planning on getting to relatively soon, given recent controversy and political goings-on in the United States, and how Gone with the Wind kind of ties in with that. It was recently removed from HBO and added back with additional context. So I want to discover if this is problematic or if it holds up. And then we have Housemaid of Dawn by N. Scott Momaday, which I talked about in a recent book haul revisit. Have not gotten around to it. It is a Pulitzer Prize winner, so it's part of the same project as Gone with the Wind. I will get to it at some point. Then we have The Ice Storm by Rick Moody. Have not gotten around to this. I have had this for so long that I have a movie tie-in of it, so I've had this for about 20 years. Oh my goodness. And then I have Purple America. Now, if you've watched any of the other bookshelf tours, you know that one of the GMs I worked with at Borders had recommended a bunch of books to me. This was one of them, and I only read one of them, The Fermata by Nicholson Baker, and it weirded me out, so I have not gotten around to any of the others that he recommended. This one actually does sound like it would be interesting. All of the others do as well, I just haven't gotten around to them, so. Becoming a Man by Paul Monette. I have not gotten around to reading any books by him, and I really, really, really need to. Oh, so at some point, I will do this. And the last book on that shelf, Long Bright River by Liz Moore. I've heard kind of mixed things about this book, but I've heard good things about Liz Moore in general, so I'm curious to give this a try at some point. Only 3 books are actively on my TBR for this shelf. They are Fugitive Pieces, Confessions of a Mask, Gone with the Wind, and Becoming a Man, so that's actually 4. I'm not good at math, I'm sorry. Alright, we're back with shelf number 4. The first book on that one is Lorrie Moore's Collected Stories. This is an advance edition that was sent to me by Steve Donahue earlier this year. Have not gotten around to it, but I'm really looking forward to it. I'm very interested in Lorrie Moore's stories. Mary Tyler Moore's biography, or autobiography, After All. I love Mary Tyler Moore. The Mary Tyler Moore Show is my favorite TV show. Don't judge me, I'm immune to it. So at some point I would really like to read that. Then we get into Toni Morrison, Beloved, which is part of my Pulitzer Prize project. I would love to get around to this sometime soon. I've really been enjoying exploring her books. I read The Bluest Eye last year. Fantastic. It was her debut novel. It was so good. A Mercy, which I have not gotten around to reading yet. Song of Solomon, which is currently my favorite read of 2020, and I think it's going to be very hard for any book to beat this year. Here's another book I've had for a really long time, Rumpel Rests His Case by John Mortimer. This was released when I was working at Borders and got really good reviews, and I thought it sounded like a fun kind of mystery series to try, but I've never gotten around to it, so someday. Colorless, Tsukuru Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage by Haruki Murakami. I read this, did not like it at all. And then also by Murakami, The Wind Up Bird Chronicle. This one I read and absolutely loved. So there you go. And then I have Lolita, an annotated version by Vladimir Nabokov. I read this, really enjoyed it. Super creepy though. Then we have Half a Life by V.S. Naipaul, who is a Nobel laureate. I had started reading this book, only got a couple of pages in and then lost my copy of it, so I got another copy and haven't gotten around to picking it back up, but I would really like to read this at some point. Also by Naipaul, we have Away in the World, which I have not gotten around to. I bought this last year, and I'm looking forward to it at some point because it sounds really interesting. Then we have The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor, which I purchased last year. Did not manage to read last June, did not manage to read this June, but would like to read soon. Then we have I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. This is something every time I mention, people tell me you need to read this book, and I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I will. Then we have Mike Nelson's movie Mega Cheese. If you've ever seen Mystery Science Theater 3000, you know who Mike Nelson was. I had a huge crush on him and couldn't tell anybody about it because I was still in the closet at the time. So when he released the book, I read it, loved it, and yeah, he's still very adorable. So then we have The Stonewall Reader, which is edited by the New York and put out by the New York Public Library. I've talked a lot about this book. I read it last year. Fantastic. And Trevor Noah's Born a Crime which I have not gotten around to reading yet. People have been telling me I need to listen to the audio, so I may try to do that at some point, but I'm really looking forward to this book. Next, we have a play by Marcia Norman called Night Mother, which, if you have not read it, is super devastating, but very good. I read this a long time ago. Then we get into some Joyce Carol Oates, The Accursed, which I have not gotten around to reading, but I'm still very curious about. Blackwater, which I have read, Pulitzer Prize finalist the year it was released, and I thought it was great. It's devastating. It's a tiny book, but it packs a punch. Blonde, which I am planning to read this year, another Pulitzer Prize finalist, and it's a brick of a book, but very much looking forward to this. I've been wanting to read this for almost 20 years. And then my last Joyce Carol Oates book is We Were the Mulvaneys, which I've heard very good things about over the years, and which I have not gotten around to reading yet. Then we have a book that was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize a couple of years ago. It's The Fisherman by Chigozie Obioma. Have not gotten around to it yet, but I'm fascinated by this and would love to read it at some point. Going After Cacciato by Tim O'Brien, which I have not read, but I would like to read. Same goes with July, July. Have not read, but would like to. And the reason I want to get to them is that I absolutely love The Things They Carried, which is a collection of short stories about the Vietnam War. Emotionally devastating and very good. I feel like I should reread it at some point, but I'm not ready to be emotionally devastated all over again. And then I would also love to read the other two books by him. Then we have The Complete Stories of Flannery O'Connor. I bought this early last year, I think, and have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I'm very curious, especially there's been a lot of conversation about her recently in the media, and I'm very curious. Then we have a slim little book, Department of Speculation by Jenny Ofel, which I read and really enjoyed. I liked it a lot. And another vintage Japan book, The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. I've heard some really good things about this on BookTube lately, and it's a very pretty edition of it, so I'm looking forward to it, but I have not read it yet. Alright, there are a bunch of books on my active TBR from that shelf. Beloved, Women of Brewster Place, I'll Give You the Sun, Born a Crime, Blonde, oh, and actually that's it. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Getting into the final shelf for this round of my bookshelf tour. First we have Butterfield 8 by John O'Hara. This was turned into a movie starring Elizabeth Taylor, which she famously hated starring in, but then she won Best Actress for it, which is just a curious bit of history. I've also saw John O'Hara listed on a list of great American authors of the last century, so I've always been curious to read one of his, and I saw this in a used bookstore during travels for work and picked it up. Have not gotten around to reading it yet. At Swim Two Boys by Jamie O'Neill, which I read when it first came out, and I only remember parts of it, but I remember liking it very much. And at that time, the idea of the conflict in Ireland and all the troubles there was relatively new to me, so it was very interesting from that angle, because it kind of exposed me to new things. And then we have Netherland by Joseph O'Neill, which I read, really liked. There are aspects of it that I don't like as much, but I think it's a fascinating book. I really liked it. Actually, I wrote a paper on it in college. That's how much I liked it. Then we have There by Tommy Orange, which was one of my favorite books of 2018. Short stories, I read it, I loved it. The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean, which I read a very, very long time ago. You can see it has that little thing that says now the inspiration for the movie adaptation. I remember really liking this book a lot. Susan Orlean has also been insane on Twitter recently, if you have not seen, so check that out. George Orwell's 1984, have not read this one, and in the current political climate, don't think I have the stomach to right now. I have read Animal Farm, and I really, really loved it a lot, so I've always been meaning to read more Orwell, but I've only read essays other than Animal Farm. Then we have Ruth Ozecki's A Tale for the Time Being, which I read and really enjoyed. Wonder by R.J. Palacio, read, enjoyed, and I also saw the movie, actually. And then, something I recently talked about in my birthday conversation with Sean the Book Maniac and Britta Boulder. It was her birthday. She mentioned that more people should read Dorothy Parker, and she had the exact same edition of Dorothy Parker's works that I do. I've only read a couple, so I need to read more. I love Dorothy Parker. I think she's a great personality. Paris Reviews Art of the Short Story. It's a collection of short stories by different authors. I have not read any of them yet. There may be one in there that I've read somewhere else, but I have not read any from this. People Who Eat Darkness by Richard Lloyd Parry. This I managed to pick up when I was working at Macmillan. It was published by FSG. So I have not gotten around to reading it, but it sounded really fascinating, and the cover has that kind of interesting, shiny effect. Next is Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. Have not gotten around to, would love to someday. Sue Perkins' Spectacles, a memoir. I read this last year, and it was delightful. Now we get into a lot of Tom Perrotta. First is The Abstinence Teacher, which I read and was very meh about. Well, not very meh. I was just meh. Regular meh about it. Then there's Bad Haircut, Stories of the 70s. I remember liking this one. Election, which I remember liking as well. A lot. Joe College, which I don't think I've read and don't think I have would have the patience for right now, especially after Mrs. Fletcher. I really did not like Mrs. Fletcher, but I don't own a copy of that one. The Leftovers, which I remember liking. Little Children. Now, fun fact, this was, I bought this when it was first published, and they had to change the cover because Pepperidge Farm sued them. True story. So when they reprinted the book, they had to do it with chocolate chip cookies instead. But I have one with the little goldfish, and I remember really liking this book a lot. 9 Inches, collection of stories. It was fine. And finally for Tom Perrotta, The Wishbones. I think I read this one, but I honestly don't remember. He has a way of writing kind of very similar male characters, and Joe College and this one seem like they really tie into that, and I don't have a lot of patience for that anymore. Okay, last 4. First is Finisterre by Fritz Peters. This is another Little Sisters classic. Would love to get around to this, have not yet. Vernon Got Little by D.B.C. Pierre. This was a Booker Prize winner. I did read it. I remember really liking it. I don't know if I would like it if I reread it now. Knock 'em Stiff by Donald Ray Pollock, short stories. I remember really liking them, but I couldn't tell you what any of them are about. And a play, The Elephant Man by Bernard Pomerantz. I did read this. I enjoyed it. Very different from the movie. I foolishly thought that one was inspired from the other. Only one active TBR book off of that last shelf, and that is Dorothy Parker. I think I got a big boost from the fact that half of the shelf is Tom Perrotta, and I've read, believe most of them, maybe not 2 of them. So, give me a second. I'm going to go through and I'm going to count the ones I've read compared to the ones I have not read, and we will do that tally and see how much of my library I have read so far. Okay, so I did the math. Of the 131 books on bookshelf number 3, I've read 52. That comes to 40%. Now, in total, there have been 409 books so far, and of those, I've read 181, which is 44%. So I'm still hovering close to 50%. It went down a little bit. The total for last one after bookshelf number 2 was 46%, so I went down a little bit, but it held a little bit steady. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens to those numbers when I do the last bookshelf and then talk about the stuff on the top, and we'll see how that goes. So far I managed to do one of these a week. I'm hoping I'll be able to do that again next week. We shall see. Again, work has been kind of crazy. These take a long time to do. So thank you for following along. I'm hoping I'll get it to you soon, and we can sort of wrap this up. I've been enjoying doing it. I've learned a lot about how much of the books that I've read that I own, and I'm really looking forward to getting back to part 2. If you've made it this far, thank you. You are the best. Fantastic. If you are not already subscribed, I hope you enjoyed this enough to follow along. And as always, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.